etc. So at the end of the day, most of the effect of those movements and those counter activities were somehow paralyzed, unfortunately. So we have to continue to work on that matter.
Yeah, thank you. Manuel, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So glad to see you.
Glad to see you too.
Thank you. Manuel, U.S. has stated a war based on this issue. Does it legally give a right to the U.S. to attack another country?
Well, when we speak about international law and violations of international law, we should realize the situation that, for example, that if we use the term international community, or if we use this term in the past, it was a camouflage term for Western community. We were saying the international community confirms this, the international community condemns that. If Washington, London, and Tel Aviv were for or against it. So this we should always take into account, but we should see what happened at 9/11, not isolated. We should see it in a history line. We had such events before. I want just to give two very well-known examples. We had the sinking of the ship Lusitania in World War I, which prepared the US-American population for entering World War I. Before that, the US population was not so much pro-war, but after the sinking of the US-American ship Lusitania, which has its own history, it was done. We have the same in World War II. We have the attack at Pearl Harbor, which was definitely provoked by the US. It was prepared again for entering the war. The difference to 9/11, in my opinion, is that this is not just a coup, a putsch, a coup d'etat inside US. I think our US-American commenters are telling very detailed what changed there, how dangerous life became for those who doubt in this, or for everyone who is somehow, who can be connected to so-called terrorism. It is a worldwide putsch, a geopolitical putsch. I remember the day very well myself when it happened. I remember that the day after already, my chancellor at that time, it was Gerhard Schröder, delivered a speech in the German parliament where he said, from now on we are all Americans. Wir sind jetzt alle Amerikaner. This 9/11 was a putsch including the whole Western world, and I agree fully, for example, with Mr. Opperskalski, who said we have to see now the history line. The attack, of course, against Afghanistan, the attack against Iraq in 2003. We shouldn't forget it was not just because of the lie of the weapons of mass destruction. There was also the legend, always dominant, that Saddam Hussein was involved in the attacks of 9/11. And I think until today a lot of Americans believe that as well, maybe also as some Germans. We see this history line indeed until the so-called Arabic Spring. So this is what we can call a geopolitical worldwide attempt to putsch a coup d'etat, to bring them all in line. If this fits or doesn't fit to international law is a philosophical question, because the ones who are dominating the scenes are defining what is international law. I give you one example. The referendum in Crimea in 2014, what I witnessed myself in March, was considered by the East as fitting to the international law, while the West was condemning it. We can say today that we have maybe two international communities. What is very encouraging, by the way, this is one of the positive effects of this. But I wouldn't put too much weight on questions of international law, because those who are dominating scenes don't care about that. They are defining this law themselves. It's the law of the bigger gun, we could call it.
Thank you.
I'd like to add to that, if I may.
Sure, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You made a lot of good points there. I'd like to point out there's a reason why a lot of us say all wars are bankers' wars. All three world wars, and I mean that completely that we are already in World War III, but all three were intentionally preceded. They were fabricated and manufactured by the elite. They were all three were preceded by the intentional crash of the dollar. It's all building it up and breaking it back down, and each time they make more and they get wealthier and they steal a little more of our gold and silver and wealth and all that in the process. So it's all meant to keep us all slaves to them.
True. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, Manuel.
There is a question that, usually when some terrorist group hit you in your own country, in international law, you have this right to go beyond your, borders and hit them in their own country. So that was the whole idea that they started the war against Afghanistan. They wanted to show that Al-Qaeda came from Afghanistan and they hit us in our own country and they kill us, and then we have the right to go there in their own country and start the war there and kill them. But the point was that they started to go further and further and they killed innocent people. That they were. You don't have the right to go and kill the innocent for killing the innocent who were killed in your own country. It is not. This kind of retaliation is not, allowed. You will have only the right to go and kill for example, the military parts. As far as I know, if I'm not, correct, please correct me. That is just a question. If any one of you have any comments, I would like to hear that.
Well, it's in a way,
Okay, Michael,
you
start, please.
They're all innocent because it's inside. They didn't get, they produced the reasoning to go and attack some other country by saying, oh, look, it's like planting evidence basically, but it's all inside. They're all innocent, it was all based on lies. So yeah, all those other countries, the reality is, with it being inside, Central Intelligence Agency, Mossad, Zionist Israeli government, and then keep in mind, of course, there's one boss over all of those G20 governments. That's the Vatican. That's where all the gold is.
Exactly. Okay,
Yes,
and Manuel, you wanted to add anything?
Just a very short thing. If it would be like that, it would have been, then the US should have attacked Saudi Arabia, of course. I think some of the so-called terrorists, of the alleged terrorists, were maybe, of Yemen nationality. And we shouldn't forget that the most important, the planning group, was in the city of Hamburg. So, I mean, this shows also, I think, the attack against Afghanistan was planned long before, and of course it was the occasion to do so. But if they would really wanted to have prosecuted terrorism, they should have marched in Riyadh, for example, to do that.
Afghanistan has opium poppies. Lots of opium poppies, which they bring back here to manufacture the heroin and sell it on the street.
Thank you. I'm going to Teresa. Teresa, are you with us?
Yes.
Welcome, dear. Teresa, there has been a commission especially for investigating 9/11. There are so many things that are still remaining questions, even after these investigations. Do you think that this report was really intended to hide the reality, or it was just an error of investigation?
It was 100% totally intended to hide the reality. In fact, a number of the people who had hard evidence, including family members of the dead, were killed over the years. And I haven't followed it enough to have names, but names and pictures have been in the press. One of the biggest players, I think, in the whole 9/11 was Israel. They had a film crew out there on the day 9/11 filming the coming down of the buildings. They had the 3 dancing Israelis who when they were interviewed, asked, "Why are you here?" and they answered, "We were told to film this." There's no possible way this investigation will have any truth or facts to it. This is a total cover-up. The biggest players are probably the Mossad, Israel, and the United States. Not going to investigate themselves. And they, I don't know how many have been killed, but in entire families, I only have so much space in my house, but there is a picture of a gentleman, his children, his dogs, his whole family was killed when he was involved in a genuine investigation of 9/11. This whole thing was to set up an anti-Muslim program, an anti-Middle East Muslim program. Iraq had nothing to do with it. Afghanistan had nothing to do with
Correct.
it. Everybody who has been attacked since then had nothing to do with it, and it's not going to stop until there's more oceans of blood.
There are no
Absolutely
magic
true.
bullets.
So,
Thank you,
I
Teresa.
don't know.
Going back to Michael Opperskalski.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. There are many surveys and polls that asked people of different countries about 9/11, and in some countries like Egypt and Jordan and Palestine, people considerably see Israel as the one performing these terrorist acts. What's your idea about this?
First of all, I fully understand their position, because for sure, and there are more than indications, there are proofs, and we could talk about that in detail, that the Mossad to some extent was involved in it. So the Zionist regime benefited from these operations that go on until today. And what I would like to say is, if we talk about innocent civilians, we should not just look on the innocent civilians who were killed in the States. Before the terrorist aggression happened, the so-called Al-Qaeda was active in Pakistan, Afghanistan, in other countries, and thousands of civilians were killed, and nobody spoke about them. So it's a little bit of hypocrisy. Just concentrate on the innocent North American death, and not to talk about the thousands of dead people who were murdered and slaughtered by the terrorists in the Islamic countries. And of course, this is also hypocrisy, because the root of these terrorist groupings, and this can be proved not only by indication but by proofs, and we could talk about it in detail, is CIA operations that started actually even just prior to the Islamic Revolution in Iran, where they tried to form and organize terrorist groups, like a group in my Iranian brothers might know them, called Forgan, which was a CIA grouping trying to liquidate the revolutionary leaders in Iran, and they had the same color, the same way of thinking, the same way of behaving, which Osama bin Laden, all these CIA people of course so-called Al-Qaeda were using then, and now you have Daesh, etc. So there's a red line, and this should not be forgotten by just talking about important but isolated evidences here and there. The red line is the most important thing to understand why the big empire and the arrogant powers are benefiting up to today from these activities, especially also the terrorist aggression, the terrorist attack in the States.
True. Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Michael Cook. Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Good. Michael, U.S. military and other authorities planned actually rehearsed defensive response to all elements of 9/11 scenario during the year prior to the attack, including multiple hijackings, suicide crash bombings, and a strike on the Pentagon. And yet we witnessed the catastrophe. Is it a sign of failure of the U.S. Army or a sign of intended failure?
Well, this is good. I'm glad you bring this up. I have some connections to the military. I volunteer with veterans. I've never served myself, but I work frequently